Movement 3. We're back to a fast tempo, back to E minor, and back to a rounded binary structure. There's a lot less chromaticism in the third movement. And by a lot less, I mean none. We don't even get any D sharps because Fils has cleverly omitted the third and all of the dominant seventh chords that we have. There's also, especially compared to the second movement, there are far fewer harmonic changes, and it's fairly harmonically static. There's lots of E minor, and then a couple of chords are thrown in here and there, and then back to lots of E minor in this compound meter. So we're going to continue to tell the story here. We've got the first movement, which is like a 1970s spy movie, and then for the second movement, we go to dreamland or whatever your students have come up with, sort of maybe like a Peter Pan theme. And then in the third movement, we're pirates. How do I know we're pirates here? Well, because it's compound time, but then we have these measures that are clearly in 3/4. So we get this 3 against 2 effect, and that's what pirates do. Some people are going to say that this is heresy, but in measures 89, 101, and 127, I conduct those measures in 3. The reason why I do that is because I like to accent all of the quarter notes, and I like to conduct with the accents. Some people say that makes it sound less natural. The hemiola effect is lessened when you do it that way instead of in 2, but I like the heavier accents, and I like to show that in my conducting. That's what I do. You can do your own thing. Okay, so right from the beginning, we got a lot of E's. Hope you like E, because we're playing a bunch of them, and then at H, we've got the violas and cellos that have the melody here. Now, all the while the bass players are playing pizzicato, for some reason we're pizzing eighth notes when we're with the cellos, but then when the cellos go back to arco, now we're quarter notes. I don't know if that means that Fils wants us to dampen the strings. I kind of hope not. This first note is in the same octave as the cello part, so definitely practice these octave E's here. If you've got students, though, that are having trouble with that, you can have them play an octave down, and I would probably guess that no one would notice. For my money, there can never be enough bass here, so I would really have them pull back the string and play nice and full and really make sure that they're pushing their fingers down hard so they can get a nice resonant sound. But I think the bass line is extremely important throughout the section all the way into rehearsal I, and I would have your basses play extra loud there. Violas and cellos have melody. Everybody else has this motor rhythm thing going on. For your violas and cellos, they need to be in a good bowing lane. Bowing lane 2, so halfway in between the middle and the bridge is where they should be playing to make sure that their tone can project and that those melodies can be heard. For your first and second violins, they can play in bowing lane 3 or 3.5 because they don't need to be in the foreground, but they do need to be able to articulate. So you need to be able to get them to grab the string so that they can make the articulations, particularly after the rest. After these rests here, you got to be able to articulate, but you don't want them to be in the foreground. So higher bowing lane can achieve both of those. Grip the string, make sure they can wiggle it so they get the articulations and you get that motor rhythm, but then lower bowing lane for your violas and cellos so that melody can come through. Basses, I want them loud anyway. In season 1, I have an episode on balance. So if you want to get an idea about how to balance your orchestra, if melodies aren't coming out or you've got some problems with phrasing or whatever, go ahead and check that out. And I've got some demonstration exercises for how to accomplish balance in some different ways. And just spoiler alert, the answer isn't always play louder, play softer. There's a little bit more nuance to that. One of the issues that I hear in this piece sometimes is that the last eighth note of the measure is sometimes played short, and it's not indicated that way. And I think that also hurts the phrasing. So make sure that this last eighth note, whether it's after a rest or after a slur, is played long, just as long as the other eighth notes at least, so that we don't have these weird staccato notes in strange places. Sometimes the students forget to move their bows and they stop the bow into the next measure, or after a slur, the bow change, they'll kind of stop the bow and play that note short. So get your students to use a lot of extra bow, and in this case, especially violas and cellos, you're going to need them to use more bow too to recover, because they've got a quarter note eighth note and then two slurred eighth notes eighth note. So they're going to have to recover back to the lower half of the bow again, or else they're going to be traveling up towards the tip, and you don't want that. For this movement, pretty much everybody should be close, maybe just a little bit above the active balance point, somewhere between there and the middle of the bow, I think is a good spot for everybody to play in. Be careful that your cellos aren't getting too close to the frog. That might make them slow down a bit. So try to get them to the middle so they can match everybody else. If they're having trouble staying in the middle of the bow, they might not be gripping the string, or they might have a bad bow hold. Sometimes cellists will tend to extend, to stretch out this pinky for some reason. Not really sure why, but just get them to relax the pinky, have them hold the bow. Just make a bow sandwich, bow sandwich. They don't need to stick out that pinky, but I'm not sure why they do it, but it's a very common problem, and it tenses up all of this part of the hand here and the wrist, and they start doing everything from the shoulder, and that's why they play at the frog. So get them to fix that bow hold, play more towards the middle of the bow, and it's going to solve a lot of problems here. Another issue that you might have with your cello section is the application of weight, and if you have a cello section that doesn't play very strong or can't really get the weight down on the instrument, it might be because they're pulling the bow into the cello instead of pushing the weight down onto the cello. That creates two problems. Number one, it uses a lot of arm strength instead of body weight to play. And, for a piece that's 3.5 minutes, that might work fine. But what happens if your student goes off to play a Tchaikovsky symphony or something, and they might not have the endurance to be able to get through that. And hopefully one day all of our students can go do something like that. But we got to set them up with the right technique so that they can do it, so their arm doesn't fall off in the third movement. The other thing that it does is when we're starting to pull in, students do tend to play in higher bowing lanes, whereas when we're pushing down onto the string and flattening our bow hair through the weight, we tend to play in lower bowing lanes, and it's appropriate for a lot of this to play in lower bowing lanes. So we want to set our cellists and our bass players up, because eventually basses are going to come in arco here at rehearsal I, and the same thing's going to apply to them. They're going to want to use their weight to play into the string. Okay, we do have this quarter note, eighth note, and then two slurred notes and then eighth note, so we do have some asymmetry in our bowing. The down bows take up more time chronologically than our up bows, and that's going to create a problem because sometimes the eighth notes are going to be louder, and sometimes we might have some bow travel. So an exercise that I like to do is I like to have them do the opposite. I like to have them play loud on the quarter note and then soft on the eighth note that's following. That way they can kind of do the antithesis of what they're likely to do, go against their natural tendency. And so when they play it, they can at least play neutral and then hopefully work towards phrasing. You can have them just play open D, and just play down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up to fight that natural tendency. And then eventually you can get them to do things like phrase, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, and get them to make shapes. And then you can have them apply it to the piece, add the left hand and do what you want to do with that. Okay, again, the same thing is going to apply here at rehearsal I. You're going to want to make sure that the style is the same as it was at H. So the violas are now playing Bs, repeated Bs in this motor rhythm here, and you're getting your bass section to join your cello section. Now, what's happened is Fis has dropped the dynamics of the upper strings to mezzo forte, and then the melody is a dynamic level louder, and I'm not a big fan of this. I don't think that we necessarily want to use dynamics all the time to balance our orchestra. I think that really hurts our phrase capabilities. So again, watch my video in season 1 on balance. There's some other stuff that you can do related to the bowing lane, changing the waveform, changing the timbre or the color of your notes to be able to come to the front of the orchestra or to take a step back. So check that out if you want more information on that. But we're going to have a lot of the same issues here when it comes to our phrasing because, again, of the asymmetry and bowing. You can use the exact same strategy. And, when you're teaching this, you're probably going to teach it to your whole orchestra, not just your violas and cellos. So your bass players hopefully should learn it. But, just really make sure basses are playing pizzicato all the way until I. So when they go back to arco, make sure their bows are where they're supposed to be. Okay, bowing lane 2, have them play with a lot of weight. Make sure that they're able to push down and bend that camber of their bow and bend that string, get a lot of weight down, and also make sure that they're in appropriate bowing lane. They should be in bowing lane 2, just like the cellos are here, just like they were here, and play towards the middle of the bow, not 100% at the frog all the time. And that way they can play and not slow down and have more potential for phrasing and for shaping. Upper strings here need to be in higher bowing lanes. They still need to use a straight bow, but they can be in bowing lane 3.5 should work just fine. And unless you're just really having balance problems, and then you can try it up in 4 and go from there. But it's probably best to work on both ends of it. So get the bows in the right spot for the low strings. If that's not working, then move a little bit with your upper strings and then, move with your lower strings until you get the balance where you want it. 106 and 107 can be a little tricky because it's a little bit asynchronous here. We've got this 8th rest on beat 1, and then we've got these pairs of 2 that, this one crosses the measure, and it can be a little awkward. It's fun, but it's just a little awkward the way it's set up. And so you might need to woodshed this a little bit and practice it slowly. It's in first and second violins. So you might just want to practice it left hand alone. You might just want to practice the bowings by themselves and then start to combine things at a slower tempo, maybe shadow bow at a time or two, and then, put everything together at a slow tempo. The idea is to get them really comfortable with it because you want the accents to line up on the bow changes. You want this crescendo to take effect. And, you want this to move into K. At K, we've got some shifting here, and the first and violin parts are in unison. The E is a good place to shift here. It's about as good as any. You can shift to this E, and I like to do that also because they can tune to the open E, and that'll work out well where they can start to check their pitches against open strings. I think that's a good way to learn how to shift and develop the ear. And then shifting back to third finger here on the A. This fingering works pretty well. I think for most orchestras, it'll work fine. If you've got some kids, sometimes in your non-varsity groups, you've got some students that started late. They might have only been playing for a year, maybe even less than that. You can just have them play open Gs if you want, and they'll match the violas here, and it's not ideal, but if you're headed into a contest and they're just not getting it and you need something to do with them, then you just play open Gs. It's no big deal. The fingering that you don't want to do here is shift with your 4th finger, play B4, and then try to do a C extension for 4. Yeah, it's like sometimes you could, with a C natural, you can do a little half-step extension here and not really have to shift. But 4-4-4 is just not a good move. It's not going to sound great, especially with a slur. So I would avoid that. I would either shift to third position and figure that out, or have them play open G. But obviously somebody's got to be able to play the Cs, and you should have a couple of kids that could do it, hopefully. And if you need work on shifting, I have a whole episode on shifting in season 1 that you can check out and start to develop good technique for shifting for everybody, your advanced students, your not as advanced students, the whole orchestra. Okay, so this spot here at rehearsal L is the same as rehearsal H, just rounded binary. So A comes back here at L. We do have a difference here, and the difference is that now our violins are mezzo forte, whereas before they were forte. I like this writing style a lot better, where everybody's the same dynamic, and that you bring the melody out through timbre and not through dynamics, because we need to think about music in a multi-dimensional sense and not just loud, soft. You know, that kind of reduces our capabilities. So I prefer this writing to what we have here. But I'm going to have them play it the same exact way as I had at H, and you probably will too. So whatever your strategy is for that, that's going to be great. And then we've got a similar pattern here, and we've got this shifting thing again that happens here that we already went over, and grow, 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 end the piece with E minor. So that's the third movement. It's much easier than the second movement, and I think easier than the first movement to put together. You'll probably spend the least amount of time on this. In the next video, I'm just going to kind of give a summary and a conclusion and maybe some ideas for a rehearsal sequence and what you're likely to do with all of this, putting all of this stuff together. So I'll catch you in the next one.